The morning fog hung heavy over the Alaskan wilderness as Elena checked her compass for the third time. Something wasn't right. She'd hiked these remote paths for 15 years, but today the reading seemed off. The needle swung lazily, unable to find true north. She tapped the glass, thinking it might be stuck, but the needle only wobbled more dramatically. "Hey, Mike, does your compass look weird to you?" She called out to her research partner, who was adjusting his heavy backpack a few yards ahead. Mike pulled his own compass from his jacket pocket and frowned. "Yeah, it's going crazy. Never seen anything like it." He glanced up at the sky, barely visible through the dense pine canopy. "Maybe there's some kind of magnetic anomaly around here. This area has some unusual geological features." Elena nodded, though she wasn't convinced. As the lead scientist on this environmental research expedition, she'd studied the geological surveys of this region extensively. Nothing in those reports mentioned magnetic disturbances. She made a note in her waterproof journal. Another mystery to investigate when they returned to base camp. The team of 4 had been trekking through the wilderness for 9 days now, collecting soil and water samples, documenting wildlife patterns, and mapping changes to the terrain since their last expedition. Climate change had altered the landscape dramatically in recent years, with unusual weather patterns causing landslides and reshaping entire valleys. "We should reach the ridge by noon," Elena said, pointing to a steep incline ahead. "We'll get a better view of the valley from up there." The climb was arduous, with loose rocks making their footing treacherous. By the time they reached the top, even Tom and Diane, the 2 junior researchers who usually bounded ahead with endless energy, were breathing heavily. Elena reached into her pack for her binoculars. This vantage point would give them an excellent opportunity to document the valley floor and note any environmental changes since their last visit. She lifted the binoculars to her eyes and slowly scanned the landscape below. That's when she saw it. At first, her brain couldn't make sense of what her eyes were seeing. There, nestled between 2 mountains, partially hidden by trees and morning mist, was something massive, white, and utterly impossible. "No way," she whispered, adjusting the focus wheel frantically. "That can't be right. What is it?" Mike asked, noticing the change in her voice. Elena handed him the binoculars wordlessly, her hand slightly trembling. He looked through them for a long moment, then slowly lowered them, his face pale. "Is that a cruise ship?" he asked. "That's what it looks like," Elena replied. "But that's impossible," Tom cut in, grabbing the binoculars. "We're at least 100 miles from any navigable water. There's no way a ship that size could be here." Yet there it was. As the morning mist thinned under the strengthening sun, the outline became clearer. A massive white cruise liner, its hull gleaming despite being surrounded by wilderness, sat in a valley where no ship could possibly be. "Maybe it's just something that looks like a ship," Diane suggested, taking her turn with the binoculars. "Some kind of weird rock formation, or—" Her voice trailed off as she got a clearer look. "That's definitely a ship. I can see the name on the side. Aurora Borealis." A chill ran down Elena's spine. The name was familiar. She pulled out her satellite phone and checked for a signal. 1 bar, barely enough, but it would have to do. She dialed her contact at the research center. "Jenny, it's Elena. Can you do a quick search for a cruise ship called Aurora Borealis?" She waited, listening to the tapping of keys on the other end. "Yeah, I'll hold." The other 3 researchers huddled around a map, trying to make sense of what they were seeing. There was no logical explanation for how a cruise ship could end up here. "Elena," Jenny's voice came back, sounding confused. "The Aurora Borealis was reported missing 3 years ago. It disappeared during its maiden voyage with 212 passengers and crew on board. It was last seen near the Aleutian Islands and never made contact again. The search was called off after 6 months. It's one of the biggest maritime mysteries of the decade." Elena felt her mouth go dry. "Jenny, I think we just found it." After relaying their coordinates and promising to send photos, Elena ended the call and turned to her team. "We're going down there," she announced, already repacking her gear. "Is that safe?" Tom asked, glancing nervously at the distant ship. "Probably not," Elena admitted. "But we're scientists. When we find something impossible, we investigate. Besides, there might be— well, we need to check if anyone's still there." The descent into the valley took 2 hours. As they got closer, the sheer scale of the ship became apparent. It had to be at least 1,000 feet long, rising several stories above the forest floor. The pristine white hull was marred by long scratches and strange scorching patterns, but otherwise, the vessel appeared intact. "Look at the vegetation," Mike pointed out as they approached. Some of these plants are growing up the side of the hull. They're at least 2 or 3 years old, Elena nodded. That matches the timeline of when it disappeared. She snapped dozens of photos documenting everything. But it doesn't explain how it got here. There's no way it could have been transported overland, and there's no water route. Maybe it fell from the sky, Diane suggested, only half joking. Elena studied the ground around the ship. There was no sign of the massive disruption that would have occurred if something this size had crashed or been dragged here. It was almost as if the ship had simply materialized in place. "There's an access door," Tom called out, pointing to a small emergency exit on the lower portion of the hull. It was slightly ajar, with a thin metal ladder extending down to the ground. The team exchanged looks. The sensible thing would be to wait for authorities. The satellite photos Elena had sent would certainly trigger a massive response. Rescue teams, investigators, and media would descend on this location within days, maybe hours, but they were here now. "I'm going in," Elena decided, checking her flashlight and securing her backpack. Anyone who doesn't feel comfortable can stay out here and continue documenting the exterior. To her surprise, no one objected. Scientific curiosity was a powerful force, and this was potentially the discovery of a lifetime. The metal ladder creaked under their weight, but held firm. The emergency door opened into a narrow service corridor, dimly lit by emergency lights running on backup power. The air inside was stale but breathable, with an odd metallic tang that made Elena's nose wrinkle. "The emergency systems are still working after 3 years," Mike whispered, his voice echoing slightly in the confined space. "That's incredible." They moved cautiously through the corridor until they reached a larger hallway lined with numbered doors, passenger cabins. Everything was immaculately preserved. No signs of damage or panic. No evidence of a hasty evacuation. The first cabin they checked was unlocked. Inside, personal belongings were neatly arranged, clothes folded in drawers, toiletries organized in the bathroom, a novel placed on the nightstand with a bookmark still in place. It looked as if the occupants had simply stepped out for dinner and were expected to return at any moment. "This is beyond weird," Diane muttered, carefully examining a framed photo of an elderly couple smiling on what looked like the ship's deck. "Where did everyone go?" They continued down the hallway, checking several more cabins. The pattern was the same in each. No signs of struggle or panic, just rooms waiting for occupants who had vanished. When they reached the main staircase, Elena paused. "Let's head up to the main deck," she suggested. "We might find some answers there." The grand atrium of the cruise ship was a sight to behold even in the dim emergency lighting. A massive chandelier hung from the ceiling, its crystals catching and refracting the limited light. Below it, tables in the main dining area were still set with fine china and silverware. Half-empty wine glasses sat on some tables, their contents long since evaporated, leaving dark rings on the crystal. "Look at this," Mike called out, standing by the bar. "There are drinks still sitting here. It's like everyone vanished in the middle of dinner." Elena approached the bar and examined the abandoned drinks. A thin layer of dust covered everything, but otherwise the scene was eerily preserved. Behind the bar, a schedule of the day's activities was still pinned to a bulletin board. The date read May 17th, 2022, the day the aurora borealis had disappeared. "I don't understand," Tom said, his voice barely above a whisper. "There's no sign of panic, no evidence of a struggle or evacuation. It's like everyone on board just disappeared at once." Elena's flashlight beam caught something on the floor near the grand staircase, a small metallic object. She bent down to examine it. It was a wristwatch, its hands frozen at 8:17 p.m. She picked it up carefully, turning it over in her hand. The back of the watch was engraved with an unfamiliar symbol, a circle containing what looked like a stylized aurora pattern. Below it in tiny letters were the words Project Timeshift, Phase 1. Elena showed it to the others. "Anyone know what Project Timeshift might be?" They all shook their heads. A faint sound from somewhere deep within the ship made them all freeze. It was subtle, just a soft mechanical whir like a distant machine powering up. "Did you hear that?" Elena asked, her heart suddenly racing. The others nodded, their faces tense in the beam of the flashlights. "Maybe we should wait for the authorities after all," Diane suggested, taking a step back toward the way they had come. But Elena's scientific curiosity had fully taken over. "That sound came from below. I think it's coming from the engine room." She moved toward another staircase, this one leading downward. We've come this far. Let's see what's down there. As they descended deeper into the ship, none of them could have possibly imagined what they were about to discover, or how it would change our understanding of reality itself. The stairway leading down to the lower decks was barely lit by the ship's emergency lighting system. Elena led the way, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness ahead. The soft mechanical hum grew louder with each step they took. "This doesn't make any sense," Mike whispered, his voice echoing slightly in the narrow passageway. Even with backup generators, no power system should still be operational after 3 years without maintenance. Elena nodded, but kept moving forward. "Nothing about this makes sense. That's why we need to see everything we can before the authorities arrive and lock this place down." The air grew noticeably cooler as they descended. Tom checked the temperature on his watch. "It's dropped almost 15 degrees since we entered the ship. That's not normal temperature variation." When they reached the bottom of the stairwell, they faced a heavy metal door marked, "Authorized Personnel Only." Elena hesitated for just a moment before pushing it open. The corridor beyond was different from the passenger areas above, utilitarian and stark, with pipes running along the ceiling and numbered doors on either side. The mechanical sound was clearer now, a rhythmic pulse coming from somewhere up ahead. "Engine room should be this way," Elena said, following signs on the wall. That's probably the source of the sound. As they moved deeper into the ship's lower levels, Diane pulled out her camera and began documenting everything. "The university is never going to believe this," she said, her voice a mixture of excitement and unease. "Nobody is going to believe this," Tom added. They passed a crew quarters section and Elena pushed open one of the doors. Unlike the passenger cabins above, this room showed signs of hasty departure. A uniform lay crumpled on the floor, a mug of coffee had spilled across a small desk, and a shower in the attached bathroom was still running, though only a trickle of water came out now. "So the crew knew something was happening," Mike observed, examining the room carefully. "They left in a hurry, but the passengers had no idea." Elena frowned, trying to piece together what might have happened. Maybe there was an emergency the crew was trying to handle without alarming the passengers. An emergency that made a cruise ship appear in the middle of the Alaskan wilderness, 100 miles from the ocean? Tom asked skeptically. No one had an answer for that. They continued down the corridor until they reached a set of double doors marked Engine Control. The mechanical hum was loudest here, a steady thrum that vibrated through the metal floor beneath their feet. Elena placed her hand on the door handle and looked back at her team. "Ready?" They nodded, though Tom looked like he might be having second thoughts. The engine room was vast, much larger than Elena had expected. But what shocked her wasn't the size. It was what the space contained. Instead of the massive engines she'd anticipated, the room had been transformed into something else entirely. "What is all this?" Diane whispered, her camera momentarily forgotten as she stared in disbelief. The center of the room was dominated by a large circular platform ringed with computer terminals. Above the platform, suspended from the ceiling, was a complex arrangement of metallic rings, each one rotating slowly around a glowing blue sphere. The sphere pulsed in time with the humming sound they'd been following. "This isn't standard equipment for a cruise ship," Mike said, stating the obvious as he cautiously approached one of the terminals. "This looks like... I don't even know what this looks like." Elena moved toward another terminal, noticing that it was still powered on, its screen displaying a series of equations she didn't recognize. Some kind of research facility, maybe? But why disguise it as a cruise ship? She pressed a key and the screen changed to display a log entry. Day 37 of Project Timeshift. All preliminary tests successful. The field generators are stable and we're ready for the first full-scale test tomorrow. Passengers remain unaware of the project's true nature. Maintaining cruise ship facade has been more challenging than anticipated, but necessary to avoid government interference. Project Timeshift, Elena murmured, remembering the engraving on the watch she'd found upstairs. They were conducting some kind of secret experiment. Tom had moved to another part of the room where a large whiteboard covered one wall. It was filled with complex diagrams and more equations. "Guys, you need to see this," he called out, his voice unsteady. "These look like calculations for... Well, I'm not a physicist, but these appear to be related to gravitational manipulation and temporal displacement." "Temporal displacement?" Mike repeated, joining Tom at the whiteboard. You mean like time travel? Or something similar, Tom said. Look at these variables here. They're dealing with space-time coordinates. Diane had found another terminal and was scrolling through files. There's video footage here, she announced. Security camera recordings. They gathered around as she played the most recent file. The footage showed the same engine room, but fully staffed with people in white lab coats rushing around the terminals. In the center of the room, the blue sphere was glowing much more brightly. A man in a captain's uniform was speaking urgently to someone off camera, when suddenly there was a blinding flash. The footage went static for several seconds before clearing to show the same room, now empty of people, with the sphere still glowing but dimmer. The timestamp on the video showed it was from 3 years ago, the day the ship vanished. Something went wrong with their experiment, Elena said slowly, trying to process what they were seeing. But what happened to all the people? A soft ping from one of the terminals drew their attention. A message had appeared on the screen. Cycle completion, 97%. Time shift reversal imminent. What does that mean? Tom asked, taking an involuntary step back from the terminal. Before anyone could answer, a loud metallic groan echoed through the ship, as if the entire structure was under sudden stress. The floor vibrated beneath their feet. We should get out of here, Mike said urgently. Now. They hurried back toward the stairwell, the ship's groaning growing louder around them. As they reached the main deck, they were met with an astonishing sight through the windows. The mist that had been lingering around the ship all morning was now swirling rapidly, forming a spiraling pattern that extended upward into the sky. This is no natural weather pattern, Elena said, pausing to stare at the phenomenon. Another violent shudder ran through the ship, sending a decorative vase crashing to the floor. The emergency lights flickered ominously. We can study it from a safe distance, Diane insisted, pulling Elena toward the exit. Come on. They made their way back to the emergency door they'd entered through, moving as quickly as they dared through the shaking vessel. Just as they reached it, Elena remembered something. Wait, she said, pulling away from the others. The captain's log, it might tell us what this project was really about. Elena, no. Mike called after her, but she was already running back toward the main staircase. I'll meet you outside, 2 minutes, she shouted back. Elena raced up to the navigation bridge on the ship's upper level. The captain's quarters were located just behind it. Inside, she found a surprisingly modest cabin. On the desk sat a leather-bound logbook. She grabbed it and was turning to leave when something else caught her eye. A framed photo on the wall. It showed the captain standing proudly in front of the Aurora Borealis. But something was off about the image. In the background, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it, was a skyline that Elena recognized as New York City. But towering above the familiar buildings were structures she'd never seen before. Sleek, impossibly tall towers that didn't exist in any city on Earth. She quickly took a photo of the picture with her phone, then grabbed the logbook and ran back toward the exit, the ship shuddering violently around her. Outside, the others were waiting anxiously. We need to put some distance between us and the ship, Mike said, already backing away. Whatever's happening, it's accelerating. They retreated to the ridge they'd first spotted the ship from, watching in awe as the mist around the vessel continued to swirl more rapidly. The air felt charged with electricity, making the hair on their arms stand on end. Look at the logbook, Tom urged. What does it say? Elena opened the leather-bound book with trembling hands. The first entry was dated May 1st, 2022, the day the cruise embarked. But it was the final entry that made her blood run cold. May 17th, 2022. Final preparations complete for the first temporal jump. If successful, the Aurora will make history as the first vessel to navigate through time as well as space. Our destination coordinates are set for May 17, 2037, 15 years forward. The passengers believe this is merely a cruise to observe the Aurora Borealis phenomenon. They don't realize they're about to become the first-time travelers in human history. God help us if something goes wrong with the calculations. Elena looked up from the book, her face pale. They weren't just doing research. They were attempting actual time travel. They were trying to send this entire ship 15 years into the future. But instead they ended up here, Diane said, gesturing to the wilderness around them. What went wrong? Mike was about to respond when a blinding flash of light erupted from the ship below. They shielded their eyes, and when they looked again, the swirling mist had intensified, completely obscuring the vessel. A deep, Resonant boom echoed through the valley, powerful enough to shake loose rocks on the ridge where they stood. The mist suddenly collapsed inward, and for a brief, impossible moment, they could see through it to where the ship had been, but the aurora borealis was gone. In its place was nothing, not even disturbed earth or flattened vegetation, just pristine wilderness, as if the massive cruise ship had never been there at all. "Did that just happen?" Tom whispered, his voice barely audible. "Did we just watch a cruise ship disappear?" Elena clutched the captain's logbook to her chest. "We need to get back to base camp and contact the authorities. Now we know why no trace of the aurora borealis was ever found after it vanished 3 years ago." She paused, staring at the empty space where the ship had been. "The question is, where did it go this time? Or maybe, when?" The hike back to base camp was tense and mostly silent. Each member of the team was lost in their own thoughts, trying to make sense of what they had just witnessed. Elena clutched the captain's logbook tightly, occasionally glancing down at it as if to reassure herself that it was real, that some tangible evidence of their impossible experience remained. "What if it comes back?" Tom finally asked, breaking the silence as they navigated a particularly steep section of trail. "What if the ship just reappears somewhere else? Or what if it comes back right where we're standing?" No one had an answer for him. When they finally reached their base camp, a collection of high-tech tents equipped with solar panels and satellite communications, they found 2 government helicopters waiting. 4 people in dark suits stood near the helicopters, looking distinctly out of place in the wilderness setting. "That was fast," Mike muttered as they approached. A woman with short gray hair stepped forward. "Dr. Elena Mercer?" she asked, not bothering with introductions. Elena nodded cautiously. "I'm Agent Patel with the Department of Defense. We need to debrief you and your team immediately regarding the photographs and coordinates you transmitted earlier today." Elena exchanged glances with her teammates. "The ship is gone," she said. "It disappeared again right in front of us." Agent Patel's expression didn't change. "We need to speak with all of you, privately." She gestured toward the largest tent. "Shall we?" The debriefing lasted 5 hours. The agents asked detailed questions about everything they had seen, touched, or heard on the ship. They were particularly interested in the engine room and the strange technology they had discovered there. When Elena mentioned the captain's logbook, Agent Patel held out her hand. "We'll need to take that into custody." Elena hesitated. "I'd like to examine it first as the lead scientist who discovered it." "That won't be possible," Agent Patel said firmly. "This is now a matter of national security." "At least let me make a copy," Elena insisted. After some negotiation, they agreed to let her photograph each page before they took the original. As Elena carefully turned the pages, she noticed something odd. Some entries had dates that didn't make sense. There were logs dated from 2037, the year they were supposedly traveling to, but also entries from years scattered across the past and future. One entry caught her attention. November 12, 2029. Third jump completed successfully. We've confirmed that temporal navigation is possible, though spatial coordinates remain problematic. The ship materialized 37 miles from our intended location. The passengers remain unaware of our true purpose, though Dr. Chen believes some may have noticed the temporal displacement effects. Side effects among passengers and crew include minor memory anomalies and déjà vu experiences. Elena discreetly took close-up photos of these future-dated entries with her personal phone while pretending to adjust the official camera. She had a feeling the government might not share everything they learned from the logbook. After the agents left with the original logbook and copies of all their photos and videos, Elena gathered her team in the main tent. "They're hiding something," she said without preamble. They weren't surprised enough by what we told them. "It's like they already knew about Project Timeshift." "You think the government was behind it?" Mike asked. Elena shook her head. "Not necessarily. But they know more than they're telling us." "Did you notice how Agent Patel never actually expressed disbelief? She never once said, 'That's impossible,' or, 'Are you sure about what you saw?' She just accepted it. So what do we do now?" Diane asked. Elena pulled out her phone and showed them the photos she'd secretly taken of the future-dated entries. "We do our own research." The captain mentioned several scientists by name, including a Dr. Chen. "We should be able to track down information about them." Later that night, after the others had gone to sleep, Elena sat alone in her tent with her laptop, Scrolling through research papers and news articles, she'd found several references to a Dr. Wei Chen, a theoretical physicist who had published groundbreaking papers on gravitational manipulation, until he suddenly stopped, publishing 7 years ago and seemingly disappeared from the scientific community. Her satellite phone buzzed, with an incoming text from an unknown number. Not everyone on the Aurora disappeared with the ship. Meet me tomorrow, 2 p.m. at the Ridge Cafe in town. Come alone. Lelena stared at the message for a long time. It could be a trap, or it could be their best lead. She decided not to tell the others yet. They'd insist on coming with her, and she didn't want to scare off this mysterious contact. The next morning, she told the team she needed to go into town for supplies. Mike offered to come with her, but she made an excuse about also needing some personal items. He looked skeptical but didn't push it. The Ridge Cafe was a small, rustic establishment catering mainly to hikers and local forestry workers. Elena arrived 20 minutes early and chose a seat with a clear view of both the entrance and the emergency exit. At exactly 2 p.m., an elderly man with a cane limped in and glanced around before making his way to her table. "Dr. Mercer," he said, not a question but a statement. "Thank you for coming alone." "You have me at a disadvantage," Elena replied, studying him carefully. "You know my name, but I don't know yours." "You can call me Leo," he said, lowering himself painfully into the chair across from her. "I was the chief engineer on the Aurora Borealis." Elena couldn't hide her surprise. "But how?" "The ship disappeared 3 years ago." Leo gave a bitter smile. "Not all of us were on board when it made its first jump. Some of us were removed from the project when we started asking too many questions." "Questions about what?" The waitress came by and Leo ordered coffee before continuing. "About the true nature of Project Time Shift. It wasn't just about time travel, Dr. Mercer. That was only part of it." He pulled an old worn photograph from his pocket and slid it across the table. It showed a group of scientists standing in front of what Elena recognized as the engine room of the Aurora. But before it had been fully assembled, they were all smiling, proud of their work. "That's Dr. Chen," Leo said, pointing to a man in the center. "The genius behind the temporal displacement technology. And that's me, next to him." He pointed to a much younger version of himself, standing tall and confident without a cane. "And that," he said, his finger moving to a woman on the far right, "is Dr. Olivia Mercer." Elena felt a chill run through her. "Mercer, that's your last name, yes. Dr. Olivia Mercer was your mother." Elena stared at him in shock. "My mother was a marine biologist. She died in a boating accident when I was 12. Leo looked at her with sympathy. "That's what you were told. The truth is, she was one of the lead scientists on Project Time Shift, and her accident happened right after she threatened to go public about what they were really doing." Elena felt like the floor was tilting beneath her. What were they really doing? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The public story, the one fed to most of the scientists and all of the crew, was that they were developing technology for time travel, but the inner circle knew the truth. Leo leaned forward, lowering his voice. "They weren't just trying to travel through time, Dr. Mercer. They were trying to create bridges between parallel universes." He took a sip of his coffee before continuing. Dr. Chen had theorized that what we perceive as time might actually be movement between nearly identical parallel realities. The technology they developed wasn't just sending the ship through time. It was punching holes between dimensions. But why disguise it as a cruise ship? Why bring innocent passengers into it? Leo's expression darkened. That wasn't the original plan. Initially, it was supposed to be just a research vessel with scientific personnel. But the funding got cut and they needed a new source of money. So they partnered with private investors and rebranded it as a luxury cruise line. The passengers paid millions for what they thought was just an exclusive Arctic cruise. They had no idea they were test subjects. Elena thought back to the perfectly preserved dining room, the drinks still sitting at the bar. So when the ship disappeared, it didn't just travel through time, Leo finished for her. It slipped into another dimension, a parallel Earth. But something went wrong with the calculations. Instead of appearing in the same location in a different time, it materialized in the wrong place entirely. "In the middle of the Alaskan wilderness," Elena said. Leo nodded. "And now it's gone again. The cycle is repeating." "What cycle?" "The technology operates on a loop. It was designed that way as a safety mechanism. If something went wrong, The ship would automatically attempt to return to its point of origin after a certain period. But it didn't return to the ocean where it disappeared from originally, Elena pointed out. It just vanished again. That's what worries me, Leo said, glancing nervously around the cafe. Each jump destabilizes the boundaries between dimensions a little more. If they can't control where it's going. He didn't finish the thought, but he didn't need to. The implications were clear. Why are you telling me all this? Elena asked. Leo looked her directly in the eyes. Because your mother left something behind. Something that could help us understand what's really happening. And I think the ship is trying to find it. What do you mean the ship is trying to find it? The navigation system was partly designed by your mother. She built in parameters that only she fully understood. And I think... He hesitated. I think the ship might be looking for you, Dr. Mercer. That's why it appeared where you would find it. That's why it's following a pattern only your mother would recognize. Elena felt a strange mixture of fear and fascination. What did she leave behind? And where is it? Leo pulled out a small key from his pocket and placed it on the table. This opens a safety deposit box at First National Bank right here in town. Box number 1729. Whatever your mother hid, it's in there. He stood up slowly, leaning heavily on his cane. Be careful who you trust, Dr. Mercer. There are people who would kill to get their hands on that technology. As he turned to leave, Elena called after him. How do I contact you if I find something? Leo gave her a sad smile. You don't. I've already said too much. He limped toward the door, then paused. The ship will appear 2 more times before the cycle is complete. The next time will be closer to water. The final time, he shook his head. Let's hope we can stop it before then. As Elena watched him disappear through the door, she felt the weight of her mother's secret legacy settling onto her shoulders. Whatever was in that safety deposit box, it somehow connected her to a missing cruise ship, parallel dimensions, and a scientific conspiracy that had already cost her mother her life. And somewhere out there, the Aurora Borealis was preparing to materialize again. Elena sat in her rental car outside the First National Bank, the small key clutched tightly in her hand. Her mind was still reeling from everything Leo had told her. Her mother, a brilliant physicist involved in dimension-hopping experiments, not the marine biologist she'd grown up believing in. It felt like the foundations of her life were crumbling beneath her. She checked her phone. 3 missed calls from Mike. She'd have to explain her real reason for coming to town eventually, but first, she needed to see what was in that safety deposit box. The bank manager looked bored as she verified Elena's ID and led her to the vault. Box 1729, the woman said, inserting her master key alongside Elena's. Take all the time you need. Just press the buzzer when you're finished. The heavy door swung open to reveal a small metal box. Elena carried it to the private viewing room, her heart pounding. With shaking hands, she lifted the lid. Inside was a sleek laptop, noticeably more advanced than current models, a small notebook with her mother's handwriting, and a strange device about the size of a cell phone, with no obvious buttons or screen. Elena opened the notebook first. The initial pages contained complex equations similar to those she'd seen on the whiteboard in the ship's engine room, but toward the middle the tone changed from scientific notation to personal journal entries. May 3rd, 2022. I've hidden backup files of the true navigation parameters. Chen suspects nothing. If my calculations are correct, the Aurora will be able to find its way back, but not to this timeline. The loop must be completed, or the damage to the dimensional barriers will be catastrophic. I've coded a failsafe that only Elena will be able to activate when the time comes. Elena felt a chill. Her mother had written this just days before the ship disappeared, and apparently knew Elena would someday be involved. She powered on the laptop. To her surprise, it started up instantly, despite presumably sitting untouched for years. The screen displayed a single prompt, voice print identification required. Elena Mercer, she said uncertainly. The screen changed immediately. Voice print confirmed. Welcome, Elena. Your mother left this message for you. A video began playing. Elena gasped as her mother's face appeared on screen. Older than in her memories, with strands of gray in her dark hair, but unmistakably her. Elena, if you're watching this, then you found the Aurora Borealis and Leo has given you the key as I instructed him to. Her mother's voice was exactly as Elena remembered it. I don't have much time, so I'll be direct. Project Time Shift was never meant to be a time travel experiment. That was the cover story. What we actually discovered was something far more significant. Pathways between parallel dimensions. She paused, looking over her shoulder as if worried about being overheard. The technology works, but it's unstable. Each time the ship jumps, it weakens the barriers between realities a little more. The Aurora was designed to make 3 jumps, creating what we called a triangle loop, before returning to its origin point. But something went wrong during the first jump. Her mother's expression grew more serious. The ship didn't just travel to another time, it crossed into a parallel Earth, one where history took a different course. And now it's stuck in the loop, trying to complete the triangle. It's already made 2 jumps by the time you're seeing this. The 3rd jump will bring it to Lake Superior near our old cabin. And the final jump, if it completes the loop and returns to its origin point, the dimensional breach will become permanent. She leaned closer to the camera,